it needs to be dealt with, and you should be supportive of having called it out. So the problem with that, of course, is the imbalance of power. You've got the councillors who have a significant influence and power, the staff who are in a precarious position. And, recent events have shown that the person in the most precarious position in this scenario, not necessarily for development applications, but across the board in dealing between the community, administering the council and the councillors, including the mayors, is the CEO. Anecdotally, the evidence is that CEOs in councils have an average lifespan of about 2.5 or 6 years, well short of their contracted periods of employment. So they disappear off the radar, bound by confidentiality agreements where they receive large payout, in effect to be quiet. And the reason they're bought off, I should say also, it's ratepayers' money that's being used. The reason they're bought off is because they are at loggerheads, for whatever reason, with the council, or some of the councillors. Again, I'm not talking about individual cases, this is anecdotally, and there's some evidence about all this. And that is something that seems to us, and I think the Minister's said publicly, it's something that needs to be looked at. There needs to be protection to staff of council for those very reasons. That they're the people who make the council operate, and they need to be protected. It's odd, really, that despite the role they play, the significant role they play, they're not protected like ordinary public servants are. Public servants are covered by indemnities, costs and so forth, if they're doing their job properly. Council staff aren't, and often they're not even covered by an insurance scheme. So they're particularly exposed, so that's something that needs to be addressed. So the next item is accountability. So there needs to be appropriate oversight and accountability of expenditure and use of public resources. So the need for new policies and procedures. The reason for that is that our experience has been doing various investigations, not just in council, but across the public sector. One of the things that my investigators used to say to me is, this whole investigation has failed. We haven't charged anyone with a criminal offence. I said, well, why haven't you charged someone? Well, there were no sufficient policies and procedures in place at that department or that council that we could use as a benchmark for why there'd been a breach of it, which may have been dishonest, hence criminal offence. So we simply couldn't prove it because they didn't have the policies and procedures in place. Now that's ironic, isn't it? The council escapes, or the public sector department escapes prosecution because they're so devious or slack, they didn't have a procedure for doing something, so you couldn't say they breached it. And you saw this recently, and this is publicly, we said this publicly. We're looking at how a person was appointed to a government board, the kerfuffle around all that involving Mark Bailey sending the CV and so forth. We said, look, it's an irregular process because there's no policy about how that selection should be carried out. It's totally at the Minister's discretion. Now that might be a good thing, or it might not be. It's certainly not transparent. But it didn't become corrupt conduct because there's no benchmark. We couldn't say that appointing someone who hadn't even applied and whose CV was given after the cut-off date breached any procedure, because there was none. There was no procedure saying how it should have been done. And we've struck that time and time again. I don't quote that example to say it is corrupt. It would have been corrupt if they had a procedure. I'm just quoting it because it's a good example of there being no procedure in place. We strike it all the time. And I say to my people, you haven't failed by not charging someone. What you need to do, what we need to do is call it out, produce a public statement that says there was a lack of governance and transparency here, there was no procedure. So we simply couldn't get to the bottom of what they really were up to. And they need to put in place appropriate procedures for that purpose. So you have travel allowance claims are obvious ones. You expect them to be very closely monitored for obvious reasons. If you're using a council car, you'd be expected to be using it for council purposes. You wouldn't want them to be using it for private purposes, away on weekends. You wouldn't want them to be doing that and to cover up that that was being done to fudge the record, the logbook, or the hours of the drivers, who was driving it, and so on. All of those things you'd expect to be tightly controlled. Often they're not. Often they're not. And it's a huge corruption risk that people can behave this way. Travel allowance claims where you have approval of the claim after the expense is incurred. That's very neat, isn't it? You know, you go and incur hundreds, if not thousands of dollars worth of expenses, come back and you say, I'd like that approved now. Well, what's going to happen there? They're going to say, no, you haven't got approval, and there's a huge bun fight about that. That's what should happen, obviously, but no, the easier way is to give it retrospective approval. And the documentation might not be adequate, might not be correct, it could well be false. That's not something you'd expect of your elected officials to be going on. The other way is asking a friend in a business, interstate, to send you an email asking you to come down for business, to justify a private trip you've already booked and had in mind, and is paid for by council. You'd be horrified to learn any of your councillors were behaving that way. And if they were, you'd expect it to be called out and corrected. And of course, community donations. That comes back to the whole question of policies that have to be unambiguous, everyone understands them, and they're adhered to. When they're not, they're called out. Council and the private sector, I've spoken a bit about this already. The relationship between council and private sector, there's an inherent corruption risk in accepting donations from property developers. That's now unlawful under the Belcara reforms. But it applies across the board, not just to developers. And one thing that staff and councillors actually have to be aware of is that people who will benefit from council contracts, whether it be a development or something else, a procurement contract, an IT contract, whatever it is, they have to be aware of friendships with private sector people. It might be quite innocent. You know, you can't quarantine yourself entirely from friendships, and no one suggests you should. But you need to have your radar. You know, people buying you coffees, that's how it usually starts. Or someone sidling up to you at the children's football game, introducing themselves, and then the relationship starts. You think it's all quite innocent? Believe me, this is exactly how some people operate. And some people are known to operate. Some big companies are known to have a policy of operating this way. So your poor old council staff and your poor old councillors, if their radar's not up, you can find yourself in a position where you develop this friendship, and you know the next step is you ask for a favour. It might be a very small favour, and human nature being what it is, you don't want to say no. You don't want to be rude. That's what human nature is, and that's what they play upon. So then the next favour is asked, and before you know where you are compromised. And then, what do you do then? You report it and risk losing your own job because you have been compromised, or do you try and cover it up and get on with it and hope it doesn't blow up in your face? So people need to be aware of that, and you'd expect them, as your elected representative, to be savvy enough to realise that's what goes on and to be aware of it and guard against it. And really, it even comes down to things like conflicts of interest, as you heard a moment ago. And I think that's a huge area that intrudes on all of these things, really. To be able to recognise, as you've heard, and it's correct, there's nothing wrong with having a conflict. It's how you manage it that is the issue. I'll tell you more about that in a moment. The next one is transparency. Here the issue is, one of the issues is use of private emails. That's a huge corruption risk. You know, even if your reason as a councillor for using your private emails, you don't have access after hours, you are working after hours routinely. Well, that's an easy IT solution to fix. I have after hours access. We have a hugely secure system that used to be almost impossible to get into, but even then I had external access. So that's something you can easily fix with an IT solution. But even if it wasn't fixed, and you're using a private email account to do council business in those circumstances from home or out of the town or even say overseas, what you can do is send your private emails received and sent in that context to your official email account. So you then have a record of them, a transparent record in the council IT system. That's one way to protect yourself if you don't have, if you have a reason for using them in the first place. My counsel to you is those people would be not using them because it's a bad look. I mean, let's face it, if you've got a dedicated work email account, why would you be using a private email account? If you had an innocent explanation, it's still a very bad look. People automatically think you're trying to hide something. And why are you trying to hide something if you're above board? That's the risk you run if you end up. And look, Mark Bailey's in that position, isn't he? He's not corrupt. We've seen all the emails. We've said 100 times there's nothing in them. It's all banter. There's nothing corrupt about it at all. But people will not let go. The media have hounded him, and us for that matter, unfortunately, for 12 months about all this. All because, as a minister, he was using a private email account. Just shows you the sort of trouble you can get into, and it's the same with any elected official. You have to be completely transparent. If you're conducting business, you shouldn't have anything to hide. Same with use of controlled entities, council companies, companies controlled by council. That's one way of sidestepping our jurisdiction because they're not public entities. Units of public administration is the definition in our Act goes. They also are not subject to the right to information laws, so it's another cute way of avoiding scrutiny. And there might be good reasons why you're using such an entity, but if so, you need to be more transparent about it, because otherwise you'll at least run into the problem of people thinking you're up to no good. In some cases you are probably up to no good using those entities. Messaging applications, if you're a councillor, someone you've elected, why are they using encrypted messaging apps? Unless it's to avoid scrutiny of what they're talking about in the messages. And criminals do this routinely. It's a bane of our life. We used to be able to recover all of this stuff. Now it's encrypted by default, as opposed to the other way around. So people in council who are using those sort of methods of communication would, at the very least, create a perception that something's not right. And that needs to be reported and avoided. So culture, as you heard, culture is fundamentally important. There needs to be a culture, starting from the top, as you've heard, within council, to have openness, accountability, and of course integrity. Everything you do as a councillor needs to be done in public interest and transparently so. No attempt to hide things. Everything that you decide, or a committee of yours decides, needs to be minuted and on the website, so that you, the community members, can look at and see what's been going on, how they've been performing, what they've decided, how they decided it more particularly. It's there for all to see. One council I won't name used to put their minutes of their meetings on the website, but there was no date and no index. So you just opened the web page and there was a huge volume of information. If you wanted to find out what they decided last week, you had to start trawling through, opening each of the links to find out which meeting was the one you were looking for. Now, I can tell you, and understandably, that created a very bad taste in the mouth for the community members who were trying their best to understand what the council was doing. I mean, that's a simple way you can be transparent. And as I say, whenever you're deciding, whenever councillors are deciding, you'd expect them to be upfront and declaring any conflicts of interest they have. So as we say, there's nothing wrong with having a conflict. Everyone has it if you're living your life normally. Everyone has conflicts, some more serious than others. The reforms that have been put in place after the Belcara hearing are designed to help councils and councillors be more open and transparent and come to the right decision when they meet as a group. So when you turn up for a council meeting, you've not only got an obligation yourself to declare any conflicts you have to your knowledge, But someone else who's at the meeting who knows something about your background and what business interest you might have, if they know that and think you have a conflict, they've got a duty to report it at that meeting. I mean, it might be something quite innocent you've forgotten about. It might be years ago. You've forgotten, but someone remembers and they bring it up. You say, oh, sorry, that's true. Then you debate it as a group and decide as a group. Helpfully, it's not designed to exclude people. If it is, if you're deliberately trying to exclude someone, that'll be corrupt conduct. That'll come to us. This is all designed to help the group get the right decision without having the decision tainted by someone voting when they had a conflict. You know, again, the evidence at Belcara from someone was that, oh, look, I've had a conflict, I've declared 20, 30 times, but in the public interest, I voted every time. And that council thought that was entirely appropriate. So look, I don't suggest the council is dishonest. I think that the councillor didn't understand the ramifications. She'd done the right thing by declaring it, but she should, in most of those cases, development applications I should say, in most of the, if not all of those cases, she should have stood aside it. So that's in the public record, that was evidence given in public. And the example I quote about what happens with conflicts is people say, look, I know for a fact I've done nothing wrong, the council might say. All this nonsense about declaring it and having debated and wasting time, it's just that. It's a shocking waste of time. I'd rather get on with the business, so I know I've done nothing wrong. Well, there's nothing more certain to get you into trouble as a council than that attitude. What you should be thinking is, I know I've done nothing wrong, but if I just stand back for a moment, look at my conduct, the way I'm going to do this and have this transaction decided, what would someone who doesn't know me think about that process? Would it pass muster? And the example I quote, this is a public one, the last election, Graham Quirk, the Mayor of Brisbane, was accused of being corrupt by the mayoral candidate, the opposition, Hardy was his name. He said the mayor was corrupt because he gave a favourable decision, a planning decision, recommending government give a huge block of land to a business owner who was a donor to the Liberal National Party, in other words, Graham Quirk's party. It came to us, it was made public, and then it comes to us to clean up the mess. This is days out from the election, so we're expected to drop everything and solve this problem. Just fortunately, we were able to solve it immediately. When I say immediately, it took a bit of work, but at the end of the day, we said there was no corrupt conduct, but it was a well-grounded perception because there was nothing documented about how that decision was made. There was no proper process gone through that the committee, of which the mayor was a member, had made this decision. So he left himself open to that perception that he'd given it to a mate who was a donor to his supporting party. So we wrote and said, look, and we said this publicly in the press release, I think the statement we released, what should have happened was that committee, of which he was chair, should have said, look, this fellow blogs has asked for that block of land for his business. He's a donor. We'll disclose immediately he's a donor to the party, and minister this, but we can assure you that had nothing to do with the decision to give him recommend the block to give it to him, because for these reasons documented, his price was the best price. It was lower than the previous offer by $500,000. He undertook to give us the money in cash within 2 weeks, and so on and so forth. 5 or 6 good commercial reasons why he was the best candidate to get that block of land. Now, if that had been the case, and that allegation was made, we could have said to him, did you minute this process? Yes, here they are. Here's the minutes. Thank you. Oh, there's nothing in this. Goes away. Or he could have done that himself as soon as the person alleged he was corrupt. Because he hadn't, it dragged on. And just for instance, imagine if it had taken us a bit longer to solve that conundrum, and he'd gone to the election without hanging over his head, which I'm sure the other side intended to happen. Well, that could well have been catastrophic for him. And it's just silly. So you need to have that change in mind. We wrote to him and said, look, you should have done these things to protect yourself. It's your best protection. Document these things. He wrote back and forth and said, thanks, but we're pretty right with what we've got ourselves already. So, in any event, if it happens again next time, we might be a bit slower in resolving that. So they're the sort of things you need to watch out for. And and they're all obvious, but honestly, these things happen every day of the week, and they happen because people don't stand up and be counted and understand that these things have to be fixed. It's not good enough. They might be small breaches, but that's the thin end of the wedge. So I'm going to take you to this one, and just remind you, as I said right at the start of this, that we are a corruption prevention agency, first and foremost. I take that role very seriously. I personally think it's our most critical, the important role in what we do. And our website, which is linked there, has a lot of resources. And you as community members or councillors, elected representatives of whatever kind, can go to that website, and there's a lot of resources you might find useful and helpful to give you a clue as to things you should be looking out for, where you might go, who you can go to report things, and how you might go about it. We have an online complaint service. We encourage you to do it confidentially. We respect that confidentiality, and it's important that we get things confidentially, because then we can investigate them properly, assess them if necessary, investigate them. If it's out in the media before we get a hold of it, if there is something going on, the baddies have all that time to get their heads together, destroy evidence, change their stories. That's not ideal. We like to get it before the balloon goes up and we can have a close look at it. If we say there's nothing in it, you disagree, you go to the media and tell them how badly we handled it, and we'll have to wear that if we're wrong. But give us the first bite of the cherry, that's our job. There's a whole lot of powers that we use to find out these things. And if you're still in doubt after the website, come to us. We're there to help you. Phone call, email, whatever you like. We're there to help you. So that's all that. Thank you. I'm happy to